Bonjour and welcome to the Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast. Join us each week for discussions on topics including culture and language, career exploration, student spotlights, projects, and more. This week we have Red Lake Nation College students Natea Neto and Adelaide Kachera reading Spooky Stories, The Cabin by Emma Kingbird, The Mirror by Sarah Barott, Across the Tracks by Rochelle Johnson, The Good Samaritan by Mandy Schram, The Snow Day by Christopher Day. Red Lake Nation College would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support in the creation of this podcast. Miigwech.
The Cabin by Emma Kingbird. Here in the great state of Colorado, there are great lengths of trees and mountains. In the middle of nowhere, Colorado, lies a small town named Fremore. Fremore is a town of 1,300 people, not too many stores, and scattered small homes. Here in Fremore lives a 27-year-old man who goes by the name Jamison King. King grew up in the state of Arizona with his 2 younger siblings and single mother. King is known for his strict personality. Although very nice, he is always seen with a bored expression on his face. Jamison has a small cabin located just outside of town, only a few miles out. Jamison's closest neighbors are an elderly couple in their own small cabin. This elderly couple has lived in the area for a couple of decades, and they only just met Jamison a couple of years ago when he moved into town for a job opening. Jamison accepted a position for the bank's head security guard. Ever since Jamison moved into town, he has got a schedule down, a routine. He wakes up and gets ready for work and packs his lunch for work. He makes sure to serve his dog, Hudson, a 7-year-old corgi, breakfast before heading out the door. He walks down his muddy driveway and into his dirty white Chevy truck. Jamison always thinks about how his life is boring and he wants to be different. He thought, I want to be different. I want to travel the world. These were the thoughts that went through his head every morning on his way to work. He would walk down his muddy driveway to his old white Chevy truck that would roar to life every time he turned the key. He turned on the radio and rolled down the muddy window. Jamison felt different this morning, the October breeze passing through his windows and filling the car with the smell of leaves. He felt different, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He felt uncertainty. He felt reckless at that very moment. I want to explore, and I want to feel alive, he thought as he started pulling up to his work. Jamison walked with smoothness and confidence as he walked into his area in the lobby as he did every other day. This day was different. This time, Jamison thought, and thought all day as he walked the huge lobby of the bank. He came up with tons and tons of ideas, from going on a fishing trip to exploring abandoned mines. As he was locking up the bank at the end of the workday, he came up with the idea of visiting Cosmos Mystery Area in South Dakota. The Cosmos Mystery Area is known for their cabin. It is said that you can stand on the walls and defy gravity. Jamison thought this was a very unique place, and it intrigued him. He thought this trip might change him in a way. He thought it could thaw out the adventurous side of him he had in high school. He grew excited as he booked the hotel and flights to this mysterious cabin and put in his leave for work. Jamison planned the trip to be 4 days, 2 days of traveling, and 2 days of exploring. Jamison has to leave in 2 days' time, and each day he grew impatient and restless. He longed for a trip for so long, and now he's finally getting out of town. As Jamison arrived at the airport 2 hours early, he checked in his bag and he made his way through airport security. He made sure to buy snacks for his long flight to Rapid City, South Dakota. He wasn't great on flights, and so he was a little nervous waiting for boarding. It wasn't that he was afraid of heights, it was his trust in machinery, and the pilots. He didn't like the thought of his life depending on others, and that's how it was growing up in his household. A single mother and 2 younger siblings. He was always taking care of something or someone, due to being the oldest, and Mom always being gone for work. As he stood up as his area was called, he took a couple of breaths and he walked steadily onto the boarding ramp. Jamison hurried onto the plane and he sat in his seat and waited hours for the doors to close. While the flight attendants were giving instructions on how to put on the mask, Jamison made sure to pop a gum in his mouth and put in earbuds to drown out the noise of the aircraft. Jamison closed his eyes, and a couple of minutes later he felt the aircraft begin to move. His heart picked up speed, as did the aircraft. His heart thumping silently in his chest, and he felt the aircraft lift off the ground, and he gave out a big exhale. Once they were at cruising altitude, Jamison spit out the gum and he sat still, and he began to think. He thought so much until he tired out his brain and fell into his sleep. Jamison woke up to the plane descending as his ears were popping. He popped another gum in and continued to listen to his music until they landed. Jamison then packed his things and entered the aisle. He walked off the plane and he instantly felt the cool breeze. He hurried through the airport and to the rental car company where he already made reservations for a vehicle. He threw in his belongings and sat in the driver's seat of the small compact vehicle. Once he sat down, he put in the direction to his hotel that was not too far from the cabin. The drive was tolerable, not too much traffic, and overall, road conditions were decent. Once he got into the hotel, he grabbed his 2 bags and he checked into the hotel. He made his way to the room, and he was welcomed with the sight of 1 bed and a small closet. The room smelled like old furniture, and the bed was a little too soft for his liking. Jamison felt exhausted from his day of traveling. He lay down on the bed and he fell into a slumber. Jamison felt the sun on his face, and he opened his eyes to his curtains open and the sun shining through, blinding his tired eyes. What time is it? Jamison thought as he began to push the covers off his long body. He didn't think he would sleep in, considering falling asleep around 7 p.m. yesterday. He then hopped in the shower and washed away his tiredness and the smell of old furniture. Once done with his shower, he began to get ready, and as he did, so did his excitement to see what this cabin had for him. He saw reviews, and he was hooked from the moment he saw that it was paranormal. He has been a paranormal fanatic ever since he was a teenager, because he thought he saw a ghost, and it looked like his dead grandpa. As he pulled up to the tourist attraction, he saw a medium-sized crowd, a few families here and there. Jamison was surprised that there wasn't a big crowd that day. He started making his way to the ticket stand, and he felt the neck hairs rise and this unsettling feeling in his stomach. That's funny, he thought after he purchased the ticket. He made the small journey to the crooked wooden cabin. Each step towards the cabin, he felt his stomach go queasy. His breath became shallow, and he grew dizzy. Jamison just thought, this pull is really strong. Jamison walked up to this cabin, and he didn't see anyone in the area, as if everyone had disappeared. The cabin giving off a sinister look as its walls were crooked and leaning over to create a shadow. Jamison didn't know what was going on. He looked everywhere for someone, even yelled, hoping somebody could hear. Jamison's breathing staggered as he walked even closer to the cabin. He took a deep breath, and he walked in. His head instantly started spinning, and he thought he was going to faint. He looked around the small cabin, and he saw a figure in the corner. Jamison tried so hard to focus on this figure that was unmoving. He took a step toward this mysterious person, and he was pushed back by some kind of power. He staggered back. He took another step forward, but this time he kept his balance. What is happening? Who is this person? Why me? Jamison kept thinking and thinking, so much it made him even more dizzy. The dark figure slowly inched forward as it began to crawl. It got bigger as it inched forward, yet Jamison could not see its face. Jamison called out to this figure, but nothing came out. He tried opening his mouth, and to no avail, it remained shut. Jamison's breathing started to quicken even more. His head starts spinning, and he closes his eyes and hears a rustling sound. He opened his eyes, and the figure was standing right in front of him. The creature has no face, and he is standing tall, almost a foot taller. Jamison's eyes widen as he takes the creature in. He then sees the creature reach forward with its lanky limb and place his palm on Jamieson's chest. Jamieson wants to move and run away from this creature, but he cannot. He feels the cold palm on his chest, and he then felt like his chest was being crushed. Chest pains fill his whole body, and he attempts to scream, but he cannot move. He is still as he stands in front of the creature. The creature takes his palm off his chest, and Jamieson instantly falls to the ground. Jamieson feels his whole body grow tired, and he falls to his knees and onto his back as he tries to catch his breath. He attempts to push himself up and run, but he is weak, so he lays motionless. He stares at the creature that is standing above him. The creature crouches down, and he peels off his black face, and he finds him. He finds himself looking down on him, and he is emotionless. He looks down on himself, and he is all black. He tries screaming, and nothing comes out, and he finds himself too tired to move. The thing that turned into him starts walking away, and the thing doesn't look back. Jamieson lays there until he no longer sees the creature, and he is surrounded by tourists that don't seem to notice him. The Mirror by Sarah Barott. I had never seen the mirror at the Museum of Russian Art, but it drew me toward it. I couldn't look away. The halls echoed with cautious footsteps of people looking at dreamscapes from the long dead. The artist did the mirror in that rusty silver with flecks of amber inlaid. Around the borders were pictures from Slavic mythology: Hochi the Deathless, Vasilia the Brave, the Firebird, and the goddess-turned witch, Baba Yaga. A sudden stillness washed over the room. I turned and realized I was the only visitor in the vast silence and memories. My hand itched. I reached towards the painting. Suddenly, my fingers started to burn. I looked down and saw my hands become coated in silver and was quickly burning its way up my arm. Panicked, I looked around and tried to scream, but the white hot searing had reached my throat. My hands, arms, and clothing were all entirely made of silver, and that silver was being pulled slowly into the mirror, like a taffy machine pulling and stretching as I screamed. I came to consciousness in a forest surrounded by birch trees. A little way down, there was a clearing with lights. I started to crawl towards it, hoping for help. The silver had worn off, but I still felt pain crackle through my body. I focused all my energy on moving through the rough terrain and around the bushes and thorns. My legs barely worked, and I felt weak and sick. The trees cleared after about half an hour of pulling myself, and I looked up. I could tell my face was scratched and bleeding. Blood and sweat running down my face in rivulets. Sitting directly above my head was a grinning skull. Its eyes lit from within by a fire that burned steadily and didn't flicker. I scrambled back, staring in horror at the heads on pikes with glowing eyes and bits of hair framing the empty sockets surrounding the house. The fence was made from femurs and spines, with little fragments of moss and cloth clinging to the bone and swaying in the wind. Some of the bones were green with age, while others were bleached white or still had bits of flesh attached. The front gate was made from rib cages with little childish hand bones blocking the front door. Various bones were scattered across the gate, but the yard was neat and tidy. As I scrambled backward, the house's shadow started moving toward me. Giant chicken legs unfolded under the shadow, and the lights in the house flared to life and began to spin wildly like a globe a child has pushed to its limits. "Lost, my child?" asked a strange metallic voice. I spun over, still on the ground, and looked up. A giant pestle and mortar were hovering in the air with a wild-eyed woman riding cross-legged in the middle. She had all white hair, all black eyes, and gleaming silver teeth. Her skin hung loose on her flesh like she was being eaten from within. She leaned down and picked up a small, tiny finger bone from the leaves, and began to pick at a piece of something stuck in her gleaming smile. Yes, I believe I am lost. I leaned away from the smell of death that permeated the air, like musky autumn leaves that had started to decompose underneath. It's a pleasant smell in fall, but here the air was thick with it, and it clung to the back of my throat with grasping fingers. Well, come with me to my house to do some chores, and I will give you a place to stay. As she said the words, the gate groaned and shook. I knew it wasn't a request. Of course. Please lead the way. No hurt in being polite. She swept down her path, her broom clearing her trail and leaving a soft carpet of leaves in her wake. The gate swung open when we arrived, and bones tied to sinew rattled and pawed at us as we passed. Back, you! She demanded. She walked to the house, which was spinning dazedly, and holding up her hand, shouted, little house, turn your back to the forest and your front to me." With that, the house stopped its madness and settled in like a chicken come home to roost. The legs folded under and made a sort of stairs to climb up. The shutters were painted black, with white and red flowers twining around piles and piles of bodies. The house seemed quaking, as if it was scared or excited. We ascended the chicken leg stairs, scaly and yellow, and opened the door to a roaring fire and the smell of mushroom soup. A monstrous woman put her black shawl on a peg and turned to me. "I need you to count all the grains in that bin, or I'll eat you with my soup." She smiled casually like she had asked me to fold the napkins, and wandered into the yard. I looked at the massive bin of grain. What kind of messed up fairy tale was this? How could I ever count so much grain? Had she given me a time it was due? I sat next to the bin and began organizing piles of 100, 200, 500 pieces of grain. I had barely counted a few handfuls. Tears, hot and metallic, slid down my face. This woman could only be the Slavic goddess Baba Yaga. I knew the story from my grandmother. I kept counting until my back ached and my tears made pools in the grain piles. In the fairy tale, I knew Vasilia was looking for the light for her evil stepmother, who sent her to Baba Yaga's house. Baba Yaga also assigned her tasks, but she had the magical love of her mother in the form of a doll she fed and carried with her. The doll completed the task as Vasilia watched, saving them and getting them a light. A skull lantern that eventually burned the evil stepmother and stepsisters up. I had no doll, no mother to ground me, no childhood to speak of to save me. No one would help me to count the grain of rice and pass through Baba Yaga's oven unscathed. My marrow would sweeten her soup. What a tedious task. Why would she do this? Count each piece of grain? To degrade herself? To cause anxiety? What goddess would be so cruel? I knew she would eat me down to my very bones, and I would sit perched upon her gate, quivering in the wind and scared of her for the rest of my days. Anxiety washed over me in waves, pulling me into the floor of the chicken house. But the house seemed to embrace me. I felt the wood warm, and my tears dried. I wouldn't do it. I would fight back. No more counting resources and beating myself up for not doing the impossible. I glanced wildly around. I didn't have a doll, but I would save myself. It was dim in the corners, but I saw a soup ladle and grabbed it, standing by the stove. I opened the giant stove door, and the fire flared up. The door blew open, and Baba Yaga entered. She smiled knowingly, the silver in her teeth shining in the moonlight and making her face glow. "So, human bones in my soup tonight?" she muttered under her breath. Turning, she rushed at me faster than any human, skittering like a spider across the floor. She grabbed my hair and slammed my wrist above the stove. I lost my grip on the ladle and screamed. Her teeth came down with drool hanging off her chin. No, I won't do it. I twisted to and fro, and the silver that had stolen over me from the mirror began to glow in my veins. A white hot fire of centuries of stories climbed through my blood. I pushed her down, and we rolled across the floor. There was a crash and a shattering of glass. I looked up and saw myself in a fallen mirror, my hands around Baba Yaga's neck, but it was me. I turned to Baba Yaga's face, hiding my own, and hissed, "Who are you?" She squirmed desperately, and I looked in the mirror again. It was me, haggard with entirely black eyes and gray skin. My hair was matted and stringy. I twisted against myself, wild and in pain. "I am you," she croaked. "I am your worst anxiety," and lunged forward, trying to bite at my neck with her razor teeth. I grabbed her hair and flipped over, dragging her with me to the oven. When the fire flared over higher, and using all my strength, I threw all my anxieties in the roaring mouth of the rage. She screamed for a moment, flared, and was gone. The little chicken hut breathed relief and settled in, sleepy and safe. The door creaked open, and a beautiful elder with soft gray waves of hair, plump and smiling, stood there. "You've done it," she murmured, and felt the heat of the silver begin to pull me toward the broken mirror. "Let her go," she said, and I lost consciousness. Miss! Should I call the ambulance? She's coming around. Hold off." I opened my eyes slowly to see the mirror hanging on the wall and completely normal. Faces crowded around me and were blurry compared to the shine behind them. As the light faded, I blinked at the security guard and a very concerned woman with a large handbag. She was rummaging through it and pulled out various medical supplies. "Are you all right, miss?" the guard asked. "Looks like you had quite the faint." "I'm fine," I said, feeling lighter than I had all summer. I looked at the old witch in the silver casting of the mirror, Baba Yaga, and smiled. "I'm sure I'll be just fine now. I just need to visit my grandmother."
Across the Tracks by Rochelle Johnson. When I was very young, we moved to an area in Bemidji known as Across the Tracks. Later, I learned that certain types of families lived there, mainly the very poor. I only knew then that it was a good place to be, as there were other children who lived nearby that were just like me. Across the Tracks had some houses that were similar in structure, tall, white, narrow, and two-story. We moved into one of these that was located on a corner right near the edge of the community, close to the train tracks. We used the back door as the main entrance, which led directly into the kitchen. On the left wall of the kitchen was a walk-in pantry, and next to that, just on the other side of the wall sink, was a door to the basement, a place we were told to never go into. Just past that was the entrance in the living room, a long, narrow room which also had a closed door. When opened, this door was the entrance to the stairway leading to the upstairs. At the top of the stairs was the first bedroom which my parents used, and just down the hall, a little ways from them, was another room. This room would have been a corner bedroom, looking out onto the corner of the street. The door to this room was always closed, and no one used this room ever. I never questioned why the doors were always closed, or why we couldn't go in there. It was just how we lived while in that house. We didn't live in the house for very long, but as time went by, things began to happen. Sometimes in the morning, they would find the locked basement door unlocked and wide open. Sometimes they would find drawers in the pantry cupboards pulled open. Sometimes at night, they would hear footsteps coming up the stairs, yet no one would be there. I never saw or was aware of these things. I only learned about them while listening to the murmurs of the adults. I didn't even know what the meanings of these things were. The community seemed to know about our house. It was said that 2 old men had died in that house. Both had died in their sleep, in the very same bed, in the very same corner room. One day, I went upstairs and found the door to the corner room wide open. I had never seen the inside of that room and found myself going towards it. It looked like a normal bedroom. It had a full bed that was neatly made up with a chenille bedspread that almost went all the way to the floor. Besides the bed was a small nightstand with a lamp sitting on it. In the corner was a wooden dresser with a mirror attached on top, tilted slightly down. I could see the entire room reflected in that mirror. There were 2 windows in the room, each one facing a different side of the far corner. The sun was shining brightly through the sheer white curtains, and the room seemed so warm and inviting. When I reached the center of the room, all of a sudden, the door slammed shut. The room was no longer inviting. It became terrifying, as if evil took over the whole room. I ran back to the door, but I couldn't turn the doorknob or pull the door open. I kept looking behind me because I was sure something was there. I started to cry and yell for help while I pounded on the door and kept looking behind me. I was so afraid and I didn't know what of. Then I could hear someone running up the stairs and the doorknob turned. My sister opened the door and yelled at me. What was I doing in there? She grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the room and shut the door behind us. She reminded me that we weren't supposed to go in there. I said that the door had shut and I couldn't get it open. She said there was nothing wrong with that door. She opened it right up. I may have been too young or not strong enough yet, but I know something was in that room. It lured me in there, and it wasn't going to let me out. The Good Samaritan by Mandy Schram. I want to tell you a story. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since it happened on Friday, October 31st, 2014. I work for the Red Lake Nation College, and we hosted a haunted locker room that night in the Humanities building, so I left work pretty late, around 9 p.m. I live in Blackduck and frequently take Highway 89 to the Nevish Road and take it all the way to Blackduck. I had a particularly long day that hadn't started out very well. I had forgotten my cell phone at home and forgot to check the gas tank that morning. My husband was out of town on business, so I was headed home to an empty house. I was cruising home watching for deer, and I noticed the gas light was on. I had no idea how long it had been on. I was still about 25 miles from home. I dropped my speed to conserve gas, but about 10 minutes later, the car had lost power and I was stalled on the side of the road. I was still more than 15 miles from home. I didn't want to call my dad because he goes to bed early and he'd be quite irritated with my lack of planning. So I started off on foot. A few minutes later, I saw headlights in the distance. The night was so clear and so cold, so the lights shone brightly. As the vehicle approached, I could see it was a semi-truck. It began downshifting from the sound of the engine, so I knew the driver had probably seen me and was planning to stop. As the truck slowly approached, I heard the sound of the window opening, and I looked up. A smiling man, about 60 years old or so, was looking down at me. He looked familiar to me, like a distant memory, but I couldn't place him. He asked if I needed a ride. I looked at him with some skepticism that he picked up on right away. He explained that he lived in the area and transported equipment along these roads regularly. I cautiously accepted a ride. When I got in, he asked me my name and he said he knew my father. He very politely shook my hand and introduced himself only as Big Mac on account of his love of McDonald's food, as was made clear by one look around, and the fact that his name was Mac. He asked where I lived and I told him. He said he knew the area and would drop me off at home. The ride was pleasant. He cracked corny jokes, some of which I haven't heard since the 80s, like the dumb, "Where's the beef?" jokes. He told me he had been driving trucks for more than 40 years and wouldn't think of doing anything else. As we approached my house, he said something really strange. He said, "Don't trip when you walk in the door. You left your gym bag sitting in front of it." I looked at him strangely, but didn't say anything. I thanked him for the ride and started to get out of the truck. I noticed a bunch of receipts and papers on the floor of the passenger side. All of them were dated from 1986. I dismissed it as a bunch of junk like all the McDonald's wrappers. As I exited the truck and approached my front door, I heard the truck take off. but I didn't see it disappear down the dirt road. I opened my front door and sure enough, I almost tripped. It was completely dark and I had left my gym bag in the front of the door. I was grateful for the warning, but a little creeped out at the same time. The next day, I went to my father's house and told him the story of the night before and asked him if he knew Big Mac. His face went gray, and he took a few moments to speak. He first asked me what the man looked like and what he talked about. He said, "I want to show you something." He turned on his tablet and found archived obituaries from the local newspaper. He pulled up an article for Big Mac Roberts. He died on Friday night, October 31st, 1986, in his truck from a head-on collision on the Nebish Road. He was 61 years old. The Snow Day by Christopher Day. It was the middle of autumn during a cold, moonless night in the woods. The winds were shrieking through the forest and blaring out any other sound that was even being made. The leaves were rustling against a lone black tar road that cut through row after row of various multicolored trees. A black pickup truck then barrels down the lonely street at an alarming rate. The headlights chase away every long, dark shadow that once cast over everything in the night. Once a dirt road appears on the side, the truck swiftly, as it was driving, swerves off the pavement and down the opening. After a short time on the pass, a small abode appears and it looks as if there's only a few rooms to call home. The truck then parks by two other vehicles, a silver sedan and a blue minivan. The truck comes to a stop. Out the car walks a man that looks as if he is in his mid-30s, wearing winter apparel and carrying a couple bags of potato chips and a 12-pack of soda. Two other men then quickly ran out the house. "Hey, what took you so long, Mike?" exclaimed one of them. Mike said, "Well, after so long you tend to forget you're through these spooky woods to your house, Schram." As everyone slightly laughed, they all quickly went inside. All four sat down at the table in the living room. Mike said, "It's been so long since we have all been together in one place. Hey Jack, how's your family?" Lawrence answered, "Oh, we've been doing great. We just got the minivan. My wife Joanne and the kids are visiting her parents right now." Jack then remarked, "What I really want to know is what Mike was up to. Come on, give me the details." Mike said, "Come on, guys, I'm not the reason we're here right now. Happy birthday, Graham." Graham then added, "Yeah, thanks, guys. I know it took a lot to get here, so I really appreciate it." "No problemo," replied Mike. The lights suddenly shut off, then came back on as quickly. "Whoa," said Jack. Graham then added, "Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I've been trying to get that fixed for a little while now." As they continued talking, the wind outside began to pick up and rattled the windows. "Dang, did you hear that wind? I heard there was going to be a storm tonight," Mike noted. Jack said, "Yeah, it's probably going to snow tonight seeing how cold it is. I hope there won't be too much." "Don't worry about it," stated Mike, and then said, "Even if we are snowed in, we have each other." As he said that, Graham yelled, "Look!" and pointed toward the window. Hundreds of little specks of white struck against the window as the men watched the storm arrive. Graham declared, "Well, looks like we'll have the chance to put that money where your mouth is." "Psst," scoffed Mike. "Besides, most of the snow will be gone once it warms up tomorrow. Let's get back to the fun stuff. Cheers." As the men continued to celebrate through the night, the storm raged on. In the morning, Mike woke up early in the guest room and decided to grab some coffee. While cutting through the living room to the kitchen, he saw that Jack was getting ready to leave. "Hey, where are you going? Couldn't stay any longer?" asked Mike. Jack replied, "Sorry, Mike, but I promised Joanne that I'd be back home soon. I wish I could stay longer." As he said that, Mike looked outside the window and saw something odd. "Huh, with a storm like last night's, I would have thought there'd be more snow." "Yeah, lucky, right?" responded Jack. He then said with a relieved tone, "I thought I would have gotten stuck in all that snow." "Well, see ya." As Jack left, Mike continued to search for coffee, but before he could find the coffee grounds, he heard an awful scream. When Mike ran into the living room, Jack was already on the ground by the minivan. Mike then sprinted out the house to check on Jack. "Hold on, I'm coming," Mike yelled, but before he could get far from the door, he was stopped in his tracks. The snow had seemingly taken a hold onto Mike's leg as if the snow had a mind of its own. Mike then felt a searing pain in both of his feet. Mike then tried to get back inside the house when he fell halfway through the doorway. He looked towards his legs. He couldn't believe what he saw. A white, cold tendril has grabbed onto his right foot. Mike then tried to get back inside, but the tendril pulled him towards the snow. Before the white appendage could finish the job, Graham appeared and kicked it with all his might and dragged Mike back inside. Mike took off anything that had snow on it, but some still clung to the flesh on his leg. "Get it off! Get it off!" painfully screamed Mike. "Hold on," yelled Graham, and then he pulled out a lighter. Graham held the small flame towards the snow and then emitted a high-pitched screech before leaping off Mike's leg onto the ground, becoming motionless. As Graham helped Mike get back up, Graham had taken notice of the continuing screams from Lawrence. When Graham was about to leave, Mike had seized him from going outside. "What are you doing? I need to get him," shouted Graham. Mike said, "I can't let you go. You're going to die out there." As they struggled, the snow had almost entirely covered Jack. As Jack fought against the snow, a dark red had begun to mix with the stark white. The snow had started eating away at Jack while his friends watched with utter horror. The first thing to go was his clothes that were once his only protection. Next was his skin, which revealed a warm meal that the cold creature craved. After that, it tore through his insides at a rapid pace. Once the screaming has died down, what is left are the bones and now a deathly quiet forest. As everything becomes silent, Mike and Graham take in everything they just saw. Graham limply dropped down to the ground while Mike is having trouble standing up. As quickly as the calm had set in, they quickly realized the heavy gravity of the situation and went throughout the house to secure every point of entry. They then tried to call whatever emergency services that could be contacted, but they were always met with mysterious silence. They were alone. Later in the morning, Mike and Graham regrouped and discussed what options they had left. "Do you think anyone will come to look once they notice we're missing, Graham?" Mike asked. Graham replied with, "I don't know. No one is picking up our calls. I think they might be having as much trouble as we are. I think we're on our own." Mike then responded with, "I think we should at least wait for some help. Every step out there could kill us." "Yeah, I think that's our best bet," Graham said. Then everything electrical in the house abruptly shut off. "Was that the snow?" asked Mike. "Don't worry, Mike. Everything will probably turn back on any minute now." They waited throughout the day, but the power never turned back on. On the second day, they waited for help, but it never came. On the third day, Graham saw the snow slightly move towards him when he was close to the window. He didn't tell Mike since he didn't want to alarm him, and he trusted that someone would come to help. On the fourth day, help never came. On the fifth day, they ran out of food. Mike then noticed that large mounds of snow had started to accumulating around the house. After talking to Graham, they both decided to just wait for help since they can't do anything about it. They both felt uneasy and cold. On the sixth day, help never came. On the seventh day, a wall of snow almost eclipsed the window and completely blocked the door outside. The firewood they have been rationing is almost gone. They know what they must do now. "Okay, Graham, what do you have there that we can use?" asked Mike. Graham describes, "Well, I have some spare gasoline in the closet. I think we can make a few torches and some spare parts. I'm just wondering how we're going to get out." They sat there for a while. Then Mike had an insane idea. Mike said, "We have to set the house on fire." "What?" yelled Graham. Mike then explains, "Think about it. It hates fire and is blocking every way outside. This is the only way." "I don't know, man," responded Graham. They're interrupted by a loud creaking above. All of a sudden, a white extremity burst out from the roof and lunges toward the two. Quickly, they ward off the intruder with torches, though with some minor injuries. They have no other choice but to enact with little time the dangerous plan. They covered as much of the area of their escape near the door as they could with gasoline. They then set the house ablaze. As the flames roared, the snow receded from the fire. As snow cleared away from the door, Graham, with the gasoline, leapt out the house with Mike following carefully, making a trail of fire. The gas ran out just as they arrived at Mike's truck. Quickly, they got inside the vehicle. Out of nowhere, a long tendril grabs onto Mike's leg, and he drops his torch. Without a moment's hesitation, Mike pulls out a large knife and cuts off the attacker's arm. Graham starts the car as fast as he can, and they drive off, triumph. "Yes, we did it," cried Mike. Graham gladly replied with, "Yeah, now let's get back to civilization." It took a couple hours to get to the nearest town. When they arrived, they noticed something was amiss. As they entered, they saw no signs of life. There was not a person in sight, nor any sound that was made from a living being. Then they saw them, the skeletal remains of the former citizens laying on the ground. As they go down every street, more signs of carnage turn up. There was no one left alive. The truck then came to a complete stop. The two sat there in the truck in complete silence. They were dumbfounded on what to do next. As they sat there, Mike noticed something. "Oh no," he said softly. A few snowflakes had just landed on the windshield. Mike and Graham both looked out the window as the snow fell outside. They were thinking the same thing. Will this nightmare ever end?
A Chimigwich to the following for their efforts in the creation of this Red Lake Nation College Gikendaasowin podcast episode. Opening and closing music by Director of Equity, Cultural Education, and Archives, Floyd Buck-Jourdain. Opening, introduction, and closing by Red Lake Nation College student Rebecca Peterson. Student hosts this episode, Natea Neto and Adelaide Kuchera. Production by IT Director Josh Nelson. And a special thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities for their generous support. Miigwech.